So hi everyone, and welcome back to the Perisseuma podcast. Perisseuma, if you don't know, is an amazing word that Jesus uses to describe the overflow of the heart. And we're exploring ways in which those of us in leadership and ministry can learn to minister out of a place of overflow. Out of that conversation, that relationship with God. And so we're just chatting with people about what that looks like, what that means, how you maintain, how you nurture, how you sustain something like that. So I'm really thrilled today to have Reverend Dr. John Weaver with us. John was my college principal when I was at South Wales Baptist College, as it was then, Cardiff Baptist College as it is now. And John brings a wealth of experience in this area, both having been in ministry himself and then lectured in theology and then been principal of the Baptist College. So John, it's really great to have you with us. It's especially grateful because you're not particularly well at the moment, are you?
Yes, I'm okay.
Yeah. Having survived lockdown, you caught it now, bless you. Well, and another great reason to have John with us today is John, you've just written a book called Emmaus, and I picked up a copy of it from you, and it's a fascinating book in terms of there are these different sort of elements to it. I love the sort of the way you began with a sort of a deep investigation of the text, looking at Emmaus and almost sort of a commentary really on that. But then from there, you sort of springboard into reflecting on your own experience.
Basically, for me, the Emmaus stories has always been a central motif for ministry, because I think that I thought that I was just reflecting something that everybody could see in that story. But another former principal, Paul Beasley Murray, wrote in a review of the book that he'd learned something new, that this could be a pattern for ministry. Well, I thought that was the most obvious thing about the story, that here is Jesus getting alongside a couple of disillusioned disciples and asking them, what's the problem? Yeah. What's your story? And then listening to their story, not criticizing, not questioning, but just listening. And then having listened to their experience and their story, then says, well, let me talk to you about what Scripture says. And particularly, of course, what Scripture says about himself. And then they come to the end of that walk, and they're about to sort of go home. And here's the Jewish hospitality. And they say, come on in, come and have a meal with us. And so Jesus goes in to have a meal. And of course, it's at that meal that he breaks the bread. Yeah. And of course, when he breaks the bread, their eyes are opened and they realize who this person who has actually sort of opened their hearts and their minds along the road, that this is actually Jesus resurrected. This is Jesus alive. Yeah. And for me, that's the pattern for us. We meet all sorts of people. They may be in church, they may be outside church, they may have faith, they may have no faith, they may have questions, but we actually are there to listen to what they have to say. Yes. And we listen to them. And then from our own faith experience, from the ways in which we have experienced God in our lives, we're able to get alongside and offer. And this is what it is. It's offering, it's not telling, but saying, this is how I've found it. And then I think the Alpha experience is very central to this, having meals together. I mean, this for me has been the great thing about being a leader of a house group. When we were in Cardiff at the Baptist College, then Sheila and I led a house group in Emmaus. And that group of people, eating and drinking was very much part of this growing in faith. Yes. And this was an open place where people could ask all the questions that I don't believe this.
Yeah.
Why should I believe this?
Yeah.
The minister says X, but is that true?
Mm.
And it's really that opportunity of sharing that fellowship.
Yes.
I mean, I use the word companion quite a lot,
Yes.
and of course, companion comes from these two Latin words, cum with panis, bread.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so a companion is somebody with who you share bread,
Wow.
or in our Christian context, someone with whom we break bread.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think that that the Emmaus Road presents us with this amazing
Mm.
picture. And as I went on to say, Act Act 8 tells the same story with
Mm.
the Ethiopian eunuch and
Yeah.
Philip.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same pattern.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the book of Acts, Paul is doing exactly the same thing as he explains.
Mm. Mm.
It's a pattern that is there for us
Yeah.
as Christians
Yeah.
in sharing with others.
Yeah. I love the emphasis you place there and in the book on listening. That it begins with listening and deep listening. You make the point that in this encounter, but in every encounter, Jesus never forces himself into a situation.
No.
Encounters often begin with a question, or even a sort of a series of questions. And I guess sometimes we can presume, can't we? We can rush into a situation or a relationship, a conversation, an encounter, presuming to know what the issue is or what the
Yes.
problem is.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I do like the way in which Jesus encounters blind Bartimaeus, or he encounters the lame man at the pool of Bethesda. Do you want to be healed? Do
Yeah.
you want to get well?
Yeah.
It's not a sense of, let's lay hands on you, let's heal you. It's
Yes.
where are you in this?
Yeah.
And I think for us, in every experience that we have in life, it's a question, what does this say about God?
Mm.
But then there's a deeper question that actually then comes, what does my faith and experience of God say to me about the situation that I'm experiencing?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's those questions that I raise about journaling.
Yes.
What do you see? What do you think about what you see?
Mm.
What do you hear? What do you think about what you hear? What do you think about what you think?
Yes.
It's that sense of we need to be those who are open to others and open to God and open to ourselves. And it's that free way interaction
Yes.
of listening
Yeah.
and not sort of leaping out and saying anything
Yeah.
until we've listened.
Yeah. And sadly, that's not something that the church generally has got a great reputation for, sadly. But I think in terms of the Perisseuma podcast, one of the things that I really loved about the book was your own experience of journaling. And how actually it's interesting as people who are hoping to help people reflect spiritually and biblically on their own experience. Sometimes people in ministry have either very little time or very little intentionality around really doing some, I think it's the phrase is the deep work, isn't it? Of really understanding yourself, your own reactions and responses to things. So when did you start journaling?
Right. Well, I come clean on the actual written journaling. I have only really done intensive written journaling when I was abroad
Mm.
with the Baptist Missionary Society.
Mm.
So I spent 2 months in Brazil. I spent nearly 2 months in Nicaragua and El Salvador.
Mm. Mm.
And I spent a month in Nepal.
Mm. Mm.
And it's in those situations that I kept I kept a daily journal.
Mm.
And what I did was I wrote down what I saw, what I felt, what I smelt.
Mm.
what I tasted. It was everything about that experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I noted where the photographs that I'd taken sort of fitted into that as well,
Yeah.
so that when I came back, I could reflect um, in an overall picture of what had actually been going on.
Mm. Mm.
And what I recount as some of those thin places, those places where God seems very close and very near,
Mm.
what came out of that, those reflections in those journals,
Mm.
and they were intense for
Yes.
me. They were intense experiences.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, some of them intensely joyful,
Yeah.
but some of them are much more pertinent to God questioning me
Mm. Mm.
as to who I was in God's grace.
Mm.
I mean, I hope that the book can be seen as being totally about God's grace.
Mm. Mm.
Um, it is, yes, it is certainly autobiography as theology,
Mm. Mm.
um, but it's not about me. It's about what I experienced of God and how my understanding of God
Yeah.
has changed, has deepened
Mm. Mm.
along that journey.
Mm. I think that's really helpful, John, because I know in the book there's a lot, you share a lot of those parts of your journey, the traveling that you did, and some of those experiences. I guess for a lot of us, sometimes we experience different things, intense experiences, and at the time, or maybe even after, the thrust of it all is just to survive, just to get through that experience. And being helped, or being taught in how to reflect well on those things, and to notice what it's doing to you and what it's doing in you, is really crucial.
Yeah, yeah, and it's helping others to discover that too.
Mm, mm,
And so listening to what somebody else is telling you about their life, um, you need to be doing two things. One is to reflect on what it's saying to you,
mm,
like my visit with Sheila to the mother of a cousin of ours in a nursing home. Now you go because you're concerned about somebody and you love them,
mm,
and you go and you sit and you observe and you see the marks of age. You see the red rings around the eyes because the eyes are dry. You
mm,
see the food that has been dropped on clothes.
mm, mm,
Um, you're aware of what's going on in the nursing home. You
mm,
can hear the television very loud, usually daytime television that you never watch.
mm,
You see people rushing around. You hear some of the angry comments of visitors, and you see the stress under which the care workers are working under.
yeah, yeah,
But then you listen to the baseline in your own mind.
mm, mm,
When can I get out of here?
mm, mm,
So why am I thinking that?
yeah,
How soon can I leave?
mm,
It's
mm,
because I'm reflecting on my own mortality.
yes,
You
yeah,
know, is this where I will end my life?
yes,
Do you know what I? So we need to question
mm,
about about. So it's not just reflecting back to the person who's there and reflecting back the love and care of Christ for them
mm,
in their situation in that care home,
mm,
but also we need to be reflecting to ourselves
yeah,
about what God is saying to us.
yeah, yeah. There's a lovely little section in the book about aging, and particularly Richard Rohr's book, Falling Upwards. And I know I underlined a lot of sections there because I'm aware as a pastor that I think as people start to get older and less able to help, less able to attend, and less able to do some quite simple basic things, there can be a feeling of uselessness. What do I actually have to offer now? What do I actually have to do? and a need to discover a different relationship with the church and potentially a different relationship with God. And the church is not often very helpful in that, I don't think.
Yeah, I think Richard Rohr, that Falling Upwards is a brilliant book. It doesn't matter how old you are, because you need to recognize when you're in the second half of life. And the earlier that you enter the second half of life, the better. Because the first half of life, he said, is writing the script.
Yes,
and the second half is reflecting on it.
Yeah.
And that's the important thing. What have my experiences taught me about God? What have they taught me about God's desire for my life? What has it taught me about the way in which God works in the world?
Yes.
And I think that's but then Richard Rohr goes on to say, because it's falling upwards, it's not falling backwards or downwards.
Yes.
And he says about, that in that time of reflection, you can reflect on relationships.
Yeah.
You have a perspective which somebody who is younger doesn't have. You can actually meet with people and realize that you don't have all the answers.
Yes.
In fact, I mean, if I'm trying to think who it was one of the great theologians. I think it was somebody like Karl Barth, or it may have been Moltmann, who sort of said, as I grow older, I have far more doubts, but I am far more convinced about the important things.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I think it's that you're able, as you get older, to have that wider perspective and to understand that, yes, there is important truth in the life, death, resurrection, and ascension of Christ, and in God's presence with us through his Spirit. But nevertheless, we are able to recognize that God is at work everywhere in the world, whether people acknowledge it or not.
Yes, yeah.
And so when I watch television or when I read books, I'm constantly reflecting and thinking, well, what's the underlying story here?
Yes.
What can I learn about these people? And so Rohr says that actually the older folk can build up relationships across the generations because they have a greater degree of tolerance.
Yes.
They have this wider perspective, and they understand that God's love is there in all of those situations.
Yes.
I mean, Richard Rohr has this lovely phrase where he says, you need to recognize that God's perspective is that God's rules do not matter as much as the relationship that God wants to create with us. Sadly, a lot of the people that we meet in churches, often in church leadership, sadly, think the rules are important. Much more important. And it's not the rules, it's the relationship. Because God is a God of mercy and forgiveness. And as soon as we start to be judgmental, we need to hear Jesus' words, judge not, that he be not judged.
I'm wondering as well about the book is about journeying towards Emmaus, but then onwards from Emmaus.
Yes.
And that does chime with some of what you're saying about reaching a stage in life, or stages, I guess, in life, where you've had some of those journeys and realized that right in the most painful questions and the darkest of times, somehow Jesus was there, but in a new way, in a different way than you were expecting. That's a tremendous perspective to be able to give to other generations or people earlier in their faith of any age. That sense of hope and of relationship and of journey, I think it is really crucial.
Yeah, and I think that's the privilege of ministry. Or I mean, it's the privilege. And when I say ministry, I don't just mean for those who are ordained. I mean, it's the privilege of being able to journey with others.
Yes.
I mean, the journeying away from Emmaus, onward, well, not away, but onward from Emmaus,
mm,
is that having had that encounter with Christ ourselves, we now use that encounter
yeah,
in our own encounters with others.
yes, yeah,
And I think that's the great privilege. I've spent the last 6 months visiting on a regular basis a very good friend of mine. He was my church secretary for 10 years when I was a minister,
mm,
and he's been dying of cancer.
mm, mm,
And I have spent um, sort of every week, sometimes a little bit more than every week,
mm,
with him and listening to his story
mm,
as he reflects on what as he's coming to the end of his life,
yeah,
what
yeah,
he's reflected, what has been important to his faith,
mm,
readings that have been important,
mm,
hymns that have been important.
yes,
Um, and I'm taking his funeral on Thursday.
wow,
And, it's that great privilege of being with somebody. And I can honestly say that the words of Paul to Timothy are right for him.
mm,
I have fought the fight.
mm, mm,
I have completed the race. I have kept the faith.
yeah,
And now the crown of righteousness.
yeah, yeah,
Well done, good and faithful servant.
yeah,
Enter your master's rest.
yeah,
But
yeah,
that's the privilege of journeying onward from Emmaus,
yeah,
of journeying with others.
yes, yeah, yeah. There's a lovely section as well, which kind of chimes a little bit with that, where you talk about journeying with others through vulnerability, and
Yeah,
that willingness to be honest about the struggles and the questions. And there may be something in that for those of us in ministry, because the temptation to present a neat package, you were talking about rules earlier, the sort of the neat model,
yes,
uh,
yeah.
but but actually it is usually in when you really open up about difficulty or questions or fears, that there's a place of connection with people.
Yeah. I mean, because everybody has those experiences.
Mm,
I mean, some people try to deny them, but they're there.
mm,
Um, there's the anxiety, there's the pain, there's the bereavement.
mm,
Um, there are broken relationships.
mm,
You
mm,
know, currently there's all the fear, the financial fears that
mm.
people have.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and they are also our experiences.
Mm,
And so it's not as if we stand aloof. We don't stand apart from this. We are fellow journeyers.
yeah,
We are companions on the road.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I love that Richard Gillard song. Brother, sister, let me serve you. Let me be as Christ to you. Pray that I may have the grace to let you be my servant too.
Mm,
I
mm,
will hold the Christ light for you
mm,
in the darkness of your fear.
mm,
I will hold my hand out to you, speak the words you long to hear. I mean, this is what journeying with others
mm,
is all about.
mm,
I mean, that's where we are really able to be Christ to somebody else.
mm, mm,
Performing at the front is not being Christ.
mm, mm,
Performing at the front is helping to teach, it's helping to proclaim, it may be prophetic,
mm,
but actually it's the one-to-one when we get alongside people that, or I think the same applies to a house group, where you've got a group of perhaps 7 or 8 people.
yeah,
You're building close relationships because you are listening to their joy and their pain,
yes,
and being able to minister into that.
yeah. And this whole fascinating thing about when we see Jesus do this on the Emmaus Road, he doesn't rush in with the answer.
No.
He doesn't just sort of appear and say, ta-da, or do
Yeah.
anything sort of incredibly spectacular. He actually goes into it with them, the
Yeah.
pain, the questions. And then it seems to me that his answer is sort of tailored fitted sort of thing to where they are.
Yeah.
It comes from a deeper place, having journeyed with them.
Yeah. I think about painful experiences
Mm,
and think particularly of tragedies. And one of the things that I recount in the book is a reflection on the 2004 tsunami,
mm,
when 250,000 people were killed in Southeast Asia.
mm,
And in doing that reflection, and to sort of say, where was God? Where
mm,
was God in that situation?
mm.
And it's a bit like Vanstone writing in Love's Endeavour,
Love's expense.
Love's Expense,
Mm,
when he writes and says that when you think of the coal pit sliding down on the school
mm,
and killing those 150 odd people, most of whom were children,
mm.
he says, God was not on the mountaintop
Yeah,
seeing it slide. He
yeah,
was actually in the school receiving the impact.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I think the same is true that you could say of the tsunami, that that God was receiving the impact of
Mm.
the wave when
Yeah,
it hit the shore.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I think that's the suffering Christ, the Christ who is with us
Mm,
in tragedy as well
mm.
as in joy,
Yeah,
and suffers with us.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I think that's so important, and it's so important for ministry that we actually do not go with the answers, but we go as a fellow human being who can enter into the suffering of somebody else.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
We have ourselves suffered in
Mm,
all sorts of ways,
mm.
but surely we can have that empathy that actually sits alongside somebody
Yeah,
and holds their hand,
yeah, yeah.
in the pain that they're feeling.
Mm,
And I think that's the aspect that I would want to get across, and that's the privilege of ministry.
mm, mm.
The privilege is not having an answer,
Yeah, yeah,
but is actually sharing the suffering.
yeah.
And so when we suffer, Christ comes alongside
Mm,
and is with us in our suffering.
mm, mm,
Not
mm,
not a My sister-in-law was remarkable when my niece was run over and killed when she was 10.
mm.
And my sister-in-law said, God doesn't take us over or under or around the situation,
Mm.
but God walks with us through it.
Yes, yeah, yeah, yeah,
And that's why I love Stuart Townend's version of the Lord's my shepherd. I will trust in you alone.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's that sense,
yeah.
and
And,
that's what we should be doing
mm,
in ministry.
mm,
Whether we're lay or ordained or whatever, we are going to share somebody else's journey,
yeah.
and we have to be brave enough and honest enough to say, and I don't have the answer.
Yeah, yeah. This is close to where sort of Henri Nouwen gets, isn't it, with the wounded healer?
Yeah, yeah,
The temptation for us to be, you were mentioning earlier about ministry can just be sort of performing at the front. The temptation to be sort of life coaches or gurus on all these things,
that's right. Yeah,
rather than journeying with people, it is huge, and
yeah,
I think the temptation to try and fix something as well, or fix a situation, it's huge, ordained or lay.
yeah,
But the call to journey with people
yeah.
is beautiful.
It's recognizing that life is full of open wounds.
Mm,
You
mm,
know that I think that Henri Nouwen is right when he says, about the wounded healer.
mm.
It is, yes, we're living with our wounded nature
Yes.
ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and in a sense, if we only want to fix things, that's usually because we can't face up
Mm,
to the wounds that we have.
yes.
We
Yeah.
want everything to be nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I remember a student at Regents who said that the problem with the church that he was a minister in training at
Mm,
was that they were nice.
mm,
He said
mm.
that was the most damning thing he could say about the church, was that they were nice. They
Yeah.
weren't real, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's, we would like it to be. I mean, that's why I put in that email conversation with Bob Morris,
Mm,
um, who I emailed every week. We emailed back and forth
mm,
while he was dying of a brain tumor, and
mm,
that lasted for 10 months.
mm, mm,
Um, was that those reflections are on where he and I might like to have been,
mm.
but the reality of where he was.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's interesting when you encounter people journeying through things which are so deeply unraveling, so deeply revealing. Is that when they open up and share things, my experience is that there's a sacredness to that. There's a preciousness, a
Mm.
holiness in that moment, which is hard to define, other than they are opening something very deep up to you, and you feel like you're standing somehow on holy ground.
Yeah,
Mm,
yeah, that's absolutely right. And while as Baptists we don't adhere to the confessional,
mm,
but there is something about the confessional,
yeah, yeah,
about those things that um, we share with others,
mm,
um,
yeah,
and and we don't go and tell everybody else about it,
mm,
but we do try to accept the yes, I think the sacredness of that experience.
mm, mm, yeah.
Yeah.
Because even there, and perhaps especially there, there's opportunities for Emmaus, for Christ to join us, to break in.
Well, that's right. I mean, I was going to say that's the other thing that I would say in all of these experiences that we've been talking about. It's alongside of what I'm saying about what I have thought
Mm,
is that there is the Christ alongside me,
mm, mm,
and it's what I'm learning about the grace of God in those situations,
yeah, yeah,
and I think that's you know fundamental to that.
yeah, yeah. Well, John, it's been so great to chat with you. Thank you so much for taking time. I hope the COVID continues to clear up for you, and yeah, I hope people can pick up a copy of the book, because it's well worth the read. There's a lot to think about, a lot to respond to in there. So thank you for it.
That's okay.
Thanks for your time.
That's all right.